we're trying to do is we're trying to bring you a nice selection of older guns that people are perhaps not aware of, or that they used to own one day or wanted to aspire to own. And this particular gun is a gun that I'm quite fond of because it holds quite an interesting place in my history in the gun trade. So I'm going to talk to you today about the Winchester 5500. Now, as I'm sure everybody will know, the Winchester 101 at its time was one of the most successful over-under shotguns the world has ever seen. I think they launched them back in the 60s. They were popular here in the 80s. So under the 101 umbrella, you'd got pigeon grades, super grades, diamond grades, and if you were really, really rich, you had a Grand European. But at the time, they were super successful on the clay circuit. They were very popular with game shooters. They just had a huge following. And this model I came across very early in my gun trade career when I was a spotty teenager making tea in the shop at Stafford. And it's a gun that I instantly thought, what a pretty looking gun. Now, since then I've tried to own one, but I've never actually come across one that I've wanted to own because they're all a bit long in the tooth, and this one is no exception. So after the 101 action finished in sort of 1986 or 7ish, they then launched the series of 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 guns. So you had a 5,000 field, you had a 6,000 field, and you had a 7,000 field, and you had a 5,500 sporter and a 6,500 sporter. Now, we're talking late 80s, possibly early 90s at this point, when these guns were very popular. A very famous shooter, Smoker Smith, AJ Smith, he won no end of stuff with a Winchester 6500. And if you went to a clay shoot on a Saturday or Sunday morning in the late 1980s, you would see a ton of these guns, or very similar type of guns. So this 5500, for me, like I said, it was a gun that instantly struck me because I really like the engraving and I like the feel of it and the way it looked. But it was kind of the beginning of the end for Winchester in the UK, because when they were producing these guns in the, I can't date it exactly, I don't know, but I think it's about 89, something like that, 88, 89. That's when Beretta was starting to come to the forefront with their 686, 687, 682 models. And because of that, the Winchester was a lot more money than the Beretta at the time. And because of that, people chose Beretta, and the sales of these guns started to dwindle. So just to give you a little bit of history, all the 101s, 5500, 6500, etc., were all made in Japan in the Cadencia factory. And like I said, in the 80s, you just couldn't touch them. They were everywhere. The quality was excellent. They were affordable. Like I said, diamond grades. They did a skeet with ported barrels. They did a trap gun, which was a multi-choke barrel with a bottom barrel with a step rib, and a sporter. And value for money and build quality and reliability, you just could not touch these things. So back to this particular gun, which is 5500. So it's a slightly different action to the 101 in that it's a little bit slightly slimmer profile. You've got this sort of chamfer on the front. But like I said, the thing that struck me immediately when I saw one of these guns was the rose and scroll bouquet, whatever you want to call it, engraving. I just think it's really nice. So these guns were all sort of coin finished actions, and like I said, because of the price of these guns, as good as they were falling out of favour, and people stopped buying with them. They voted with their feet. They were buying 325s, Browning Cittoris, Beretta 686s, 682s, and as a result, Winchester UK went bust, I think, early 1990s. After that, they were rebadged as something called the Classic Doubles, which when I get to Classic Doubles, I will gladly do a video and talk about those. There's two types of Classic Doubles. There's a good one like this, and there's a dreadful one. And I'll tell you which to avoid and why. So we just have a quick look at the mechanics of this shotgun. So it's not dissimilar, with it being Japanese, to a Browning or a Miraku. It's got that sort of deepish feel in the action. It's got a full length bolt with a locking plate, again not dissimilar to a Browning. It is a bit different in that the barrels don't actually lock up into the bottom of the action. Now this one is a 30 inch. The majority of them were 28 because at that point in the late 80s, 28 inch was still a very, very popular barrel length. It isn't so today because we've moved on massively in terms of clay target shooting. People want longer barrels, they want to shoot, you know, more distance clays, and 28 inch these days, if I'm honest, is classed as sort of a ladies gun, or you would look at something dedicated like an Olympic skeet gun, something like that. So to find one of these guns from that era in 30 inch is not super uncommon, but it's less common than finding a 28 inch one. They also did fixed choke versions of it at the time, 5500 fixed choke versions, and this particular gun is wind choke, so it's factory multi choke with the wind choke system. And for those who don't know, Winchester actually pioneered and designed the multi choke system in around about 1982. 3-4-ish, I believe. So this one's 18.6 bore, which is quite interesting as well, because usually they will be tighter than that because they've got little chokes. So like I say, to compare a wind choke, it's very similar to the sort of length of a Browning invective choke, you know, sort of a couple of inches long. And despite the age of this gun, it's not actually too bad. Now, if you speak to anyone that's ever owned a Winchester 101, 5500, whatever, there's the common comment that they were loose when they came out the box. So if you pick one up, quite often they do feel a bit sloppy, whereas this one doesn't. I've no doubt at some point this gun has had some remedial work, but to open it, it actually feels nice and crisp. To open and close it, nice and crisp. And as a condition point of view, it ain't bad at all. Muzzle bluing is a little bit thin, few marks on the stock, but it is all original. It's got the original Winchester butt plate, which is one of the reasons I picked it, because I like things that are original. It's got an adjustable trigger. Now at the time, there wasn't many guns with adjustable triggers, and you've got 4 or 5 different positions where you actually move the trigger to, whereas most guns, if you look at a Browning for example, there's only 3 positions. The trigger pulls are good. This one, interestingly enough, has got quite a bit of height in the cone, which I wasn't expecting. I don't know whether the stock has been pushed up at some point in its life or not, no idea. And they're just a nice thing. Like I said, I've always wanted one, but I've always been a bit fussy about finding one that was really mint with a nice piece of wood. I will continue my quest. If anyone's got one that wants to sell me one, I'll be more than happy to look at it. Like I said, at the time in the 80s, really popular. I mean, you had a lot of guys from the UK that were serving in places like Germany and the military, that sort of time. And I've seen no end of Winchesters, particularly the 23 side-by-sides, that were actually bought back by people in the military. And these are stamped with Winchester GmbH, so it's quite easy to spot one of those. In terms of the Browning similarity, you've got the selector, you know, it's a down and across, rather than something like an Italian gun or a Beretta where you just push the selector from left to right and right to left. Not quite a Schnabel forend because it hasn't got as much of a lip on the Schnabel as you'd expect. And one thing's worth pointing out is they all had lacquered stocks. Okay, you didn't get one that was oil finished because principally these were built for the American market. I think it's got USA somewhere on the barrels, apart from made in Japan. But the good thing about a lacquered stock is when you're out in all weathers, it is just a bit more practical. Yes, you will have occasions whereby they look worse when they get dented or marked, but ultimately, I think if you look after a lacquered stock, then they can be very practical. Balance, I would say, again, typically Browning, let's not forget that. A little bit barrel heavy, you've got to come right near the forend to get any kind of a balance. So yeah, a little bit on the, a little bit forward of the hinge pin. For me, I would be putting a Kicky's recoil pad on it or something like that, rather than this dreadful plastic thing, although it's original. And I think that would just restore the balance, get it back over the hinge pin. And it does feel good, you know, it's not an expensive gun, but it still feels, after all this time, very solid, very pointable. And like I said, I've always liked Winchesters. I will always like Winchesters. I've got a huge following. Not so much these days, because there's a lot of other stuff you can buy on the market for sort of 400, 500, 600, 700 quid. But for anybody looking to get into the sport, I would never discount one of these shotguns just based on the fact that parts availability is a bit scarce, because they are still a very good and a very capable bit of kit. That's the Winchester 5500. If you've got any questions, feel free to drop us an email, comment below. Please like and subscribe to the channel. And if you've got any, if there's an older gun from the 70s, 80s that you want us to have a look at and review, we'll see if we can get hold of it, and we'll happily do that. Thanks for watching. See you soon. Cheers.